had Ricky Martin not performed the song that Draco Rosa and I wrote called "The Cup of Life," La Copa de la Vida, on the Grammys, there would be no Latin Grammys. I think it's very important that our history, which by the way is much longer in this hemisphere than English speaking music. I mean, we had the conquistadors show up with the priests, these monks, and they started incorporating the music they heard of the native peoples in with their Latin roots, in their Spanish roots, and they began creating songs. And that was the start of it 400 and something years ago. So a lot of people don't understand that history and why it's so important to preserve it. It's important for, Latin culture to be acknowledged and to be held high in the culture of the world. We went to Bogota and we spent a week there, just walking down the streets full of people everywhere, happy, smiling, full of life, even though they have problems. Very sexy people. Just everybody was very sexy. And everybody, all the girls had their nails perfect, their clothes perfect, their hair all done. The guys were all buffed, and just walking down the streets like they owned the streets. It felt like a movie, it was very exciting. And, I just fell in love with Colombia. I'm still very much involved as the chairman emeritus and co-founder of the Latin Songwriters Hall of Fame. And we're an American organization that honors Latin music, global Latin music, not from any particular country. There's so many countries in what they call the Latin diaspora. I think there are about 22 countries. And that includes Spain and Portugal, because they're part of it as well. My mother was a Cuban composer and poet in exile. Her name was Elena Casals, and now she's known as La Musa, because a statue of her that was done in 1954 became the prize, the statuette called La Musa. That's why we called our induction ceremony the La Musa Awards. And in her memory, I wanted to help to create the Latin Songwriters Hall of Fame according to the high standards set by the Songwriters Hall of Fame. So I got together with Latin hitmaker Rudy Perez, and it was his dream for many years before to create the Latin Songwriters Hall of Fame. And so when I got inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in New York, I joined the board, and I said there really seemed to be a strong need for this, because just the same reason the Latin Grammys needed to exist, because the regular Grammys only had one award for anything Latin. And so, what about all the countries, all the genres, all the greats? I grew up in exile. I was born in the United States, so they can call me a dreamer. My mother was Cuban and my father was Hungarian, and they met in Venezuela. And, they weren't together. And so my mother was very poor. We lived in the projects of Miami, and all my cousins and uncles and my grandparents came over from Cuba. And living in exile, living poor, living in, having to eat food that was, we had to pick up at the Freedom Tower in a box, So when you grow up like that, we didn't have a father in the house. You get this feeling, you either go down the tubes like some of my cousins did that didn't survive. They got into drugs, they died, I have like kids of some of those some of them are in jail right now. And I, on the other hand, said, no, I'm not going to go down the tubes. I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to build a life that's beautiful. And, I was not only poor, but I was Latino and I was gay, and so a lot of things going against me, just all of these terrible things. And it motivated me to want to be a success so I could take care of my mother. So I figured out a way that I could go from genre to genre and concentrate on each artist, regardless of their genre, as to what story they wanted to say. When I concentrate on the story, then the music follows. Plus, genetically, my mother was a songwriter. My grandfather was a writer of books. My great-grandfather was a poet that was a comrade of José Martí back in the turn of the other century. So I come from a long line of lyricists and poets. So that was already built in to my system. So to me, I learned how to write in every genre of music to succeed, because I wanted to be able to take care of my mother. I had left Miami because there wasn't much opportunity for me. Back in 1971 is when I left. I was 17 years old. I went up to New York. I began my own duo called Night Child. And eventually I went to college in New York City at NYU, and I started a singing group called Desmond, Child and Rouge. And we had a lot of Latin rhythms and Latin storytelling, of the street gangs in New York and all this other kind of stuff. And so Desmond, Child and Rouge made 2 albums, and we were combining rock with Latin feeling and Latin stories, Latin culture. And we went all the way to becoming the musical guests on Saturday Night Live in 1972. And then our group broke up, of course, as groups always do. But it took a very long time to finally come back to Miami and get back in touch with my Latin roots, my Cuban heritage. And I came back in 1994, 95. From Los Angeles. And I had already made my name in rock and roll and in pop music. And so I came back to Miami to live there with my husband. We've been together 34 years. And so we bought a house on Miami Beach, and pretty soon I had 4 houses and I had 4 studios and I had offices. We were working with Ricky Martin, and Ricky was an artist that was already breaking in Latin music. He had a following from Menudo, and a lot of people followed him. He was in General Hospital as an actor. He played in Les Mis on Broadway. And so everyone said, oh, you should work with Ricky Martin. Well, it turns out he just lives 6 blocks down the street. And so I started my studio, the Gentleman's Club, and we didn't have much room, so we decided to miniaturize and create the music all on computer. Ricky Martin was the ignition that lit the Latin music explosion. Had Ricky Martin not performed the song that Draco Rosa and I wrote called The Cup of Life, La Copa de la Vida, on the Grammys, there would be no Latin Grammys. That performance opened everybody's eyes that Latin music had value and that it had progressed and it was new and it had a fresh sound. And that opened the door for reggaeton. That opened the door for a song like Despacito, written by Luis Fonsi and Erica Ender, that made it to #1 and stayed at #1 for 37 weeks. And so once that door was burst open, the world realized that even if they didn't understand the lyrics, they loved the beat, they loved the music, and they can sing along with it. Why is it that when I went to Japan with Bon Jovi, that all the people in the audience None of them spoke English really, but they could sing along with every word of Living on a Prayer, a song that I co-wrote with Bon Jovi. And so it just shows that music, you know, can get into somebody's soul and they can learn the lyrics even if they don't understand what it's saying. And that's the universal nature of music. And that's such a beautiful thing. And so, you know, I love that I was part of that Latin music explosion. And I'm still working with Ricky on different projects and we're still very close. I'm just like in awe of all the Latin American countries, the specialness of, you know, norteño, of, you know, the you know, Santo Domingo, you know, and just all of it is so rich. And you know, there's so much to bring to the world. And so, you know, we just have to keep doing what we're doing and get our message and our music and our joy of life and our hope out to the world. You know, in Latin music, of course, you know, there are two songs, The Cup of Life, La Copa de la Vida, you know, Here We Go, Ale, 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 that's hopeful, and Living La Vida Loca is all about fun, and it's still, you know, upside, inside out. Those are kind of rock anthems, stadium anthems that Latin music really didn't have before. So I brought my experience working with Bon Jovi, Aerosmith, Kiss, Joan Jett, and brought it to Latin music. And Draco, my collaborator, he had spent a lot of time in Brazil. And so he brought this kind of Brazilian, you know, Puerto Rican, Latino feel into the rock anthem thing that I was bringing to the table. And together we created a new genre of music. I think the one song that I've, you know, been a part of, I co-wrote with John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora, is called Living on a Prayer. And that song has stood the test of time, but people know that song all over the world. Even if they don't know who sang it, they can sing along with it. And so to me, that song means so much. And I know that, you know, we've gotten so many letters all through all these years. It's been, you know, 30 something years, of people who said that that song got them through a hard time, that they got them through the, you know, the loss of a loved one. It got them through losing their job. It got them through cancer. It saved them from killing themselves. There was a story, we got a letter from a guy who said he was going to kill himself. He had lost his job. He couldn't make any sense of his life. He was alone. So he drove his car to the bridge and he, you know, jumped out of the car, leaving the car on, the radio was on, and you know, windows down, and he just jumped out of the car. He was getting ready to just throw himself off the bridge, and Living on a Prayer came on the radio. And that was his favorite song. So he said, okay, well, you know, let this be the last song I hear before I kill myself. So he got back in the car to hear the song, you know, he turned it up. By the time it got to the final chorus, which is the lift that modulates up, he drove home. He found a reason to live in that song. It's called Living on a Prayer. Big songs, big life. Because I've written some big songs, but even bigger, my life has been very big. So, yes, I you know, I had to write the book. It took 7 years to write this book because new things kept happening. So I had to keep adding chapters. I got a chance to work with Barbra Streisand. So there's a whole chapter in it called Barbara Land. I just released the audiobook of my book. And it's really fantastic because, you know, the book is great because it has 100 pictures in it. Great. So actually you need both because the audiobook has music that goes through it. So there's a wonderful recording in there of me and Draco Rosa coming up with Living La Vida Loca, like right there and on tape. You hear us thinking about it, coming up with it, and going back and forth, having fun, laughing, and it's really great to hear the birth of a song that has made such an impact in the world. TWO, the story of Roman and Nero, and it's the story of us wanting to have children and finding a surrogate mother and through in vitro fertilization, and our sons are fantastic, and they are 22 years old now. They graduated NYU. They're working in law firms in New York as paralegals. They want to study law, and they're the best guys ever. Just shows you that you're born who you are, and nobody can change it. And that's what a soul is, right? You're born with your soul. And whether you're born, and you developed as an embryo in a laboratory, you still, have a soul. And so those are things, modern ideas that the world is moving so fast that we have to get used to. Well, at this point, AI doesn't have a soul. Right now, the songs they come up with. So when there's a song that comes up that was written by AI, where I go like, oh my God, it's like, that's really inspired. That really changes the way I look at the world and makes me feel a certain way. I think we're a long way from that day.